It looks like a quiet room, with a peaceful fountain, but something's wrong. Helen is on the floor, struggling to even breathe, and nobody's coming to help. Out of nowhere, these red tentacles appeared, and they weren't letting go. Helen begged for more time. Wait, I'm not ready. But he was dragged down, into the deep water, calling out for Leo. Helen's cries for help were quickly silenced, as he was pulled under. But this nightmare didn't start today. 22 years ago, this same room was already covered in blood. The hallway was a mess, covered in fresh blood, leading straight to the garden. Molly and her friend found something in the fountain. It's just a boy. While the baby cried, Molly started digging, trying to bury the evidence. Helen tried to finish the burial, but the cats wouldn't stop digging, like they knew what was hidden. She couldn't believe they were gone, and this shameful grave was all she could offer. While Helen broke down, Daria walked toward the fountain, carrying a baby covered in blood. She placed little Jasha into the cold water, and just like that, the cycle began again. Daria called the boy a miracle, but Helen wasn't buying it. He's just a magicless boy. But Daria didn't care. She saw a child, where Helen saw the devil. She warned that keeping him would ruin everything Daria built, and taint their entire legacy. Then Helen dropped the truth. Are you really going to ignore that his birth killed her? Helen tried to remind her that this boy killed her sister, but Daria silenced her instantly. She didn't want to hear it. Instead she looked at the baby, and gave him a name, Jasha. She welcomed him to the academy, calling it a sanctuary for those with a shining soul. But raising a boy in a school for witches was a dangerous gamble. Daria was betting everything on a miracle that might actually be a curse. Daria didn't care about the blood. She just looked at Jasha and promised him a future here. Helen couldn't stand to watch. She turned her back on them, leaving Daria to her obsession. Daria carried the boy inside, past the massive golden doors of the Rosenmere Academy. She spoke of one absolute rule that every single student was forced to follow. No one enters. And as the doors creaked open, the academy's darkest secret was finally coming home. Daria finished her warning as the heavy door slammed shut. No one enters the house pool. It's the academy's only rule, and the one place you should never go. But in a school full of secrets, some rules are just begging to be broken. The nightmare was only just beginning. Life inside the house looks normal on the surface, but everyone's on edge, studying rules they can't break. Giant shadows haunt the glass, and the whispers never stop. Jasha can feel it. Something's watching from the deep. The lesson is simple. Don't look into the dark, because in this place, the water has a mind of its own. Jasha slams the book shut. The pressure is getting to him, but he isn't alone in the room. Someone's watching from above. Molly looks down and laughs. Oh, he spotted us. She's literally walking on air, while he's stuck on the ground. She doesn't hold back. You're 6 and still no magic? I could light candles at 3. Honestly, it's just sad. In a world built on power, being ordinary is a death sentence, and Molly wants to make sure he never forgets his place. The girls are showing off, floating through the air, while Jasha stays buried in books, trying to find a spark of his own. The ginger girl laughs. You better take notes. Molly just beat the record, and she's not even trying. Molly stands there dripping wet, 20 whole steps on the water. She's already a natural, while Jasha can't even start. The others want to play a game. Let's go back to the pool. But this isn't about fun. It's about watching him fail. The ginger girl smiles. I want to see Jasha try. He knows it's a trap. But in this house, there's nowhere left to hide. The ginger girl grabs him. Don't be shy, Jasha. You're coming with us. It's just a game of hopscotch. They lead him to the pond, a dark spot by the tower, where the water striders skip, and the air feels heavy. Molly steps up to the edge. Fine, I'll show you how it's done. She doesn't hesitate, stepping right onto the surface. 1 for salvation, 2 for the abyss. She sings a dark rhyme, as her feet touch the water, and she doesn't sink an inch. 5 for damnation, 6 for sin. She's gliding across the deep, like it's solid ground, waiting for him to follow her in. Molly's on a roll now, counting every step, as she sprints across the pond, making the impossible look easy. She hits 20 without breaking a sweat. The girls are cheering her on, calling her incredible, and Molly's loving the attention. She's already planning to be the top student in the school. But the mood shifts fast. The ginger girl leans in close, whispering 2 words that make the air turn cold. Your turn. She drops his pen into the deep, just to see him flinch. Are you scared? She's done playing nice, and she's tired of waiting. She calls him a coward, and gives him a hard shove, right toward the dark water. There's no more running away. The game just got real. 1 shove is all it takes. Jasha hits the water hard. His books and papers scatter, as the surface closes over him, and the light begins to fade. He's sinking fast now, deeper into the cold dark, where the silence is heavy, and the world above feels like a distant memory. But he's not alone down here. Something massive is waking up. A giant red eye opens, watching him fall into the heart of the abyss. Small jellyfish drift past, swishing through the shadows, while something much bigger starts to swirl in the depths, waiting for him to reach the bottom. The game is definitely over. This isn't a schoolyard prank anymore. There's something hungry, lurking beneath the surface, and it's finally found its prize. Gwen finally lost her patience. What are you waiting for, boy? With one cruel shove, she sent Jasha spiraling into the deep. The water swallowed him whole, but he wasn't alone down there. Something massive just opened its eye, and it's been waiting a long time to eat. While Jasha sinks into the dark, surrounded by glowing stingers, Gwen can't stop laughing. She thinks this is all just a joke. Molly watches from the shore. That was mean, Gwen. But mean doesn't even cover it, because whatever is under the surface isn't planning on letting him go. Jasha is fighting for his life, but on the surface, the girls are just mesmerized by the glowing jellyfish. Penelope finally snaps out of it. He's magicless. She knows he can't save himself, and the clock is running out. But something else is down there. A massive shadow rises from the dark, and instead of attacking, it gives Jasha a sudden push. He breaks the surface, choking and shivering on the bank. The others think he's safe now, but they're dead wrong. Molly sees the truth. You got a pet? Something followed him back up, and it's still watching from the water. Jasha can't believe he's still alive. What was that? He knows something was in the water, and Molly is watching him, like she's trying to solve a puzzle. The magical glow starts to fade, and the girls want answers. How did you do that? But Jasha has no idea. He's just as confused as they are. Penelope isn't interested in magic tricks. Drop it. She's done playing games, and she wants Jasha to know exactly where he stands. The school bell cuts through the air, ending the moment. That joy was short-lived. Penelope says coldly, he doesn't belong here. The others head back to class, leaving Jasha alone in the dirt. Molly stops for one last word. She's got a point, you know, and for the first time, Jasha starts to wonder if she's right. Molly isn't holding back. Well, duh, you can't become a witch. She thinks his dream is a joke, and she's tired of watching him try. But Jasha isn't backing down. He leans in close, catching her completely off guard. Then don't watch. If it's so sad for you, then just look away. He's done asking for sympathy. It's not like I'm asking you to care. He tells her to just pretend that he isn't even there, if that makes her life easier. Jasha turns to walk away, leaving her standing in the garden, but he leaves her with a promise. Next time you look at me, you'll see I've become a witch. He's determined to prove her wrong, and he won't say another word until he's reached the top. The real transformation is only just beginning. Molly watches from the bank as Jasha tries to save his papers. He knows she's there, but he's too focused on the mess to say anything more. Molly isn't impressed. HMPF. She turns to walk away, but then she stops cold. Something feels wrong. What was that? Did I imagine it? She senses a presence in the water, something huge and hidden, just beneath the surface. Jasha doesn't notice a thing. He's just staring at his notes. There's no saving them. He lets the ruined pages go, watching them drift away. The papers sink into the dark, drifting down into the deep. They fall right into the path of a massive shadow, waiting in the weeds. And it's not alone down there. Everything looks peaceful. On the surface of the water, a tiny insect schemes the ripples, completely unaware of what's waiting below. Deep in the shadows, a massive mouth opens wide. Rows of jagged teeth line the darkness, ready to strike. Snap! In a split second, the surface explodes. The insect is gone, swallowed whole by the dark. The water settles again, like nothing ever happened. But the message is clear. Something is hungry, and it's just getting started. While the hunt was on, Daria was busy, getting ready for the main event. Every detail had to be perfect, from the red lips to the final veil. She stepped out into the pouring rain, where everyone was waiting. The real show was just about to begin. Daria laid out the rules. The Rosenmere sisters had one job: use their magic to save the world, while the others fell in line. Molly wasn't buying the act. Something about this felt wrong, but Daria wasn't finished. The moment you use magic for yourself, you're dead to this sisterhood. Then she turned her focus to the one person who was really in trouble. Jasha. Daria made her choice, and it wasn't who anyone expected. Jasha was getting the honor of leading the Sunday prayer. The other girls couldn't believe it. Molly and Gwen were fuming, since that spot usually goes to the top student of the week. But Daria had an answer ready. Jasha worked twice as hard after his notes were destroyed, and bullying has a high price. She didn't want to hear another word. On your knees, she commanded, as she draped the veil over him. As Jasha began the prayer, a strange glowing creature emerged from the depths. The ritual was finally beginning. Jasha led the prayer, his voice echoing through the silent hall. As the sisters knelt in unison, the words were a shield against a dark and bloody world. And as the final chant finished, the entire tower began to glow. A blinding light burst through the windows, signaling the ritual was a success, and the prayer had been heard. Daria couldn't hide her smile. Well done, Jasha, she said softly. I'm proud of you. But not everyone was happy. Molly watched from the side, her face full of resentment. as the others were dismissed. The ceremony was over, but the tension in the room was only getting started. As the sisters filed out, Jasha tried to keep his head down, but Molly wasn't about to let him walk away that easily. She used her magic to toss his books around, trying to get a reaction, but Jasha just kept moving. "I said hey," she snapped, grabbing him by the shoulder. "Don't let this go to your head." Molly reminded him that a boy like him didn't even belong here, according to the ancient rules. But Jasha didn't flinch. He told her to back off, and suggested she ask the Forbidden House pool herself. That was the breaking point. Molly grabbed him by the collar, demanding to know if he thought she was crazy. They stood there in silence, locked in a bitter stare, neither one willing to be the first to blink. Molly finally had enough. She pushed Jasha aside and walked away, without saying another word. But his words stuck with her, and as night fell over the school, she couldn't just let it go. She had to see for herself. The hallways were pitch black, as she crept through the shadows, with nothing but a single candle to light her way. She reached the forbidden wing, where a warning sign made it clear that trespassing here meant certain punishment. But she didn't turn back. She stood before the massive door, knowing that once she opened it, there was no going back. Molly stood before the massive door, holding nothing but a single candle. "Here we go," she whispered to the shadows. She grabbed the handle and pulled, but the heavy wood didn't budge. "Locked." "Of course it is." She tried a simple opening spell, hoping for a bit of luck. "Open," she commanded. But even magic couldn't save her. The door stayed shut, leaving her stuck in the dark, with nowhere left to go. Molly wandered through the silent hall, searching for something to ease her thirst. She found a small fountain, and took a quick sip, without thinking twice. But the moment she finished, the weight of what she'd done hit her. "Forgive me," she whispered in a panic. She'd just touched the sacred water, something strictly forbidden in this house. Tainting the pool meant unleashing unholy powers from the darkest depths. She'd put everyone in danger, especially her sisters, and now there was no way to take it back. Molly wiped her mouth, trying to shake off the guilt. She couldn't live with the idea of her sisters suffering because of her mistake. All this for a stupid boy, she muttered to herself. How embarrassing. She gave her cheeks a quick slap, trying to snap back to reality. She looked up at the painting on the wall. At first it looked like a dream, a beautiful mermaid rising from the waves. But as she looked closer, the truth started to show. It wasn't a fairy tale. The mermaid held a sword, and the water below was stained with blood. The creature was a monster, tearing into a fallen knight. It was a grim reminder that some things in this house weren't what they seemed. "Just a boy," Molly whispered to the empty hall. She wasn't going to let her guard down. "I'll keep my eyes on you, Jasha." She made a vow right then to watch his every move, no matter how many years it took. She didn't trust him, and she wasn't about to start now. While she stood there making plans, the water she'd tainted began to move through the house. It flowed through the pipes, hidden behind the walls. It reached Jasha's room, where he took a long drink, completely unaware of what was actually in his glass. The curse was already spreading. It flowed into the gardens, and down into the kitchens, hissing through the taps, like a warning nobody heard. But the signs were everywhere. In the sink, the water ran over a cold blade, and a heart that had stopped beating. The darkness Molly feared was already inside the house. The water didn't stop at the taps or the sinks. It hissed through the pipes, and deep into the walls of the massive house. Everything was connected. A giant tank rumbled, vibrating with the weight of the liquid inside. The system was alive, and it was carrying Molly's mistake everywhere. Down in the dark, below the foundations, the water pooled into a massive hidden reservoir. Fish broke the surface, splashing in the cold blue. But at the very bottom, under the shifting waves, a golden guardian waited, clutching a heavy sword. The house had its secrets, and they were all starting to wake up. The results were in, and they were a total disaster. One by one, everyone was failing. Jasha couldn't believe it, as the weight of the news finally settled on him. In the dim candle light, he realized the nightmare was only just beginning. Jasha waited outside the office, surrounded by posters praising the school's power. He finally stepped inside, and Daria didn't even look up. She asked how he was doing, but her mind was clearly on much bigger problems. The school was overflowing with new applications, and things were getting messy. But then she mentioned the corruption of blood magic, and the room went cold. Daria kept talking about bringing people to the light, but Jasha was falling apart. He finally spoke up and asked the one question that was eating him alive. How could he be a witch when he was actually a boy? Daria promised him he'd be something special, but he didn't believe her. He couldn't even light a candle, and he'd never heard of a male witch before. When she didn't answer, the silence said everything, and Jasha finally broke. Daria tried to play nice, calling Jasha a late bloomer, and telling him he was special. She asked why he even wanted to be a witch, and his answer was heartbreaking. He didn't care about power, he just wanted to fit in, and finally have some friends. But Daria wasn't having it. She told him his loneliness was getting in the way of his true purpose in life. She pointed to the guardians and said they'd be his only company before leaning in to pray, and that's when things started to feel really wrong. Daria leaned over Jasha and told him to open his eyes. She wasn't just praying, she was looking for something hidden deep inside him. She promised he'd be greater than anyone else, but her words felt more like a threat than a gift. Jasha tried to act normal, but he couldn't stop sighing. As she hurried him off to bed, she told him he needed sleep to perform well in school, but the way she said it made it sound like he was just an experiment. As the door slammed shut, the silence in the hallway felt heavier than ever. Daria wasn't alone. In that quiet room, something massive was swirling in the shadows, just behind the glass. The creature loomed over her, like it was waiting for a progress report, and Daria finally snapped. "I'm working on it," she said, sounding more defensive than she ever had before. "It looks like Jasha isn't the only one taking orders from something terrifying." Jasha and Gwen were just trying to make the farm work fun, but the playfulness didn't last long. Once the teacher stepped in, Ms. Bao wasn't playing, especially when she heard the creepy man was back. He was watching them from behind the fence, waiting for a chance. But Jasha realized the real nightmare was already inside. Daria was just minding her own business, walking past the fence, but a local drunk named Uncle Bernd wouldn't leave her alone. He started mocking the school, calling everyone loonies, and making creepy offers. He didn't realize who he was dealing with until his bottle just exploded. Daria didn't even flinch. She just kept walking straight to the locked gate. Daria didn't have time for more interruptions, but Mary was desperate. She'd brought her daughter all the way through those dangerous woods. Mary dropped a bombshell, claiming her little girl was actually a witch. She started describing the nightmare at home, where the walls were alive, the family portraits were twisting into grins, and the world outside looked like a sick painting. But the scariest part was seeing her daughter right in the middle of it. Mary was begging for her daughter's life, but Daria wasn't moved. She shut the gates, leaving them both out in the cold. Daria had bigger problems, like the creepy guy hanging around the school. She found Helen and gave the order to get rid of him. Helen had a plan, but it wasn't exactly by the book. Daria didn't care, as long as the cops didn't show up. By tomorrow morning, that man would be ancient history. The dinner bell rang, and the whole school sat down for a feast. Inside it was warm, full of good food and happy chatter, but outside in the dark, that creep Bernd was still lurking around. He was frustrated because he couldn't see what was happening inside. Molly was just enjoying her meal without a care in the world. He didn't realize someone was already creeping up behind him. Helen finally caught that creep outside, but not in human form. She'd turned Bernd into a disgusting slug, and she wasn't done yet. She mocked him, saying the slimy look suited him perfectly. She headed straight for the chicken coop and opened the door. The rooster was waiting, and Helen didn't hesitate to serve up a snack. "It looks like Bernd won't be bothering anyone ever again." The silence of the night is finally broken by a sound nobody wanted to hear. A trail of blood leads out of the cabin and straight to the trees, where Mary's struggle finally came to an end. But inside the house, everything is perfectly still. Daria just sits there, sipping her tea by the warm fire. She doesn't look bothered by the tragedy outside. In fact, she looks like she was expecting it. The morning news confirms everyone's worst fears. The mother and daughter, who visited just the other day, are both dead. The papers are calling it a tragic murder-suicide, but Daria isn't buying a single word of it. She remembers the mother talking about dark visions and things that shouldn't exist. The truth is much more terrifying. Mary didn't just snap, she was messing with forbidden blood magic, and she pushed it way too far. By the time she realized she'd reached her limit, there was nothing left of the little girl, only the monster that took her place. Daria knows the truth. If Mary hadn't died, the town would have burned her at the stake anyway. But the staff inside is focused on a different problem. They're disgusted that Daria is still keeping Jasha under their roof. To them, he's just a waste of space, a boy who can't use magic and doesn't belong here. Daria doesn't care what they think. She's the one in charge, and she's not backing down. But while the adults argue, the other girls are taking matters into their own hands. Gwen and Molly have already decided that Jasha doesn't deserve a moment of peace. They're pushing him to the breaking point just to see what happens next. Jasha is finally learning that the world isn't just scary, it's cruel. Inside the study, Daria is done playing nice. She reminds Ms. Bao that she's just the chef, and her opinion doesn't matter. Daria isn't keeping Jasha Out of the goodness of her heart, she's following orders from the guardians themselves, and nobody is allowed to question the light. But the tension is cut short by a knock at the door. The kids are back, and they aren't alone. Gwen and Molly look as smug as ever, while Jasha stands there, trying to keep it together. The night is quiet, but inside these walls, the real trouble is just getting started. At Rosenmere, punishment is a ritual. They call it being cleansed from sin. Ms. Bao doesn't hold back, striking them one by one, until the lesson sinks in. But the physical pain is the least of Jasha's problems. Right next to him, Molly is whispering, pure poison. She calls him disgusting, and promises that one day, the guardians will see him for what he really is. To her, he's just like the men who hunted her kind, and she can't wait to watch him burn. The light they worship isn't there to save him, it's just waiting for the right moment to finish him off. The cleansing is over, but the marks won't be fading anytime soon. Jasha stands alone in the quiet of the night, with nothing but his shadow for company. High above, the moon watches over the rooftops of Rosenmere, like a cold, silent witness. Everything looks peaceful from a distance, but the darkness hiding behind these walls is deeper than anyone knows. Deep in the Schwarzwald, nature shows its teeth as a predator claims its prize under the moon. Nicole was losing her patience. Hurry up, we can't afford to waste any more time. She grumbled about the long walk. If I'd known it was this far, we would have left right after breakfast. But the young girl behind her didn't say a word. Hey, I'm talking to you. Molly finally looked up. Excuse my rudeness, Ms. Nicole, but the journey was just beginning. Molly couldn't look away. I've never seen the moon look this bright before. It's so pretty. She was completely mesmerized. I feel like I could look at it forever. But Nicole just watched in silence. Inside the manor, behind a massive golden door, Daria stepped into the water of the house pool. She called out to the statues, divine guardians, I'm speaking to you. Through the water. It's about Jasha. He's troubled, and he's completely lost. But the truth was much darker. Daria finally admitted it. I thought he'd be extraordinary, but he's just a normal boy, and the others resent him. They resent your child, she told the statues, as Jasha lay on the floor, covered in fresh scars. I can't do this alone. I've tried being patient and giving him compassion, but it's just not enough. She lowered her head into the swirling water. Please, just help him rise. But while she prayed for help, the sound of the rod echoed through the halls. Thwack! The sound of the rod didn't stop, as Jasha lay there, waiting for it to be over. In the pool, the water began to swirl, as Daria prepared for a forbidden ritual. Outside in the rain, Nicole hurried Molly along. Just our luck, she grumbled. Speed up the pace, you better pray that Rosenmere actually accepts you. Daria held a sharp dagger over the water. It'll be your salvation, she whispered. I won't let any temptations corrupt your soul, even if blood magic is strictly forbidden here. She cut into her own arm, letting the blood fall, as massive red tentacles rose from the depths. You have to understand, Daria said to the empty room. I'm only doing this to save you. Daria's voice echoed. God's own angels will take your hand and guide you. She promised Molly that she'd become exactly what she was meant to be. But in the pool, the red tentacles wrapped around Daria, pulling her under. Then a massive eye opened in the dark, staring directly at Molly's back. Nicole didn't notice. Look, you can see the lighthouse. It's finally clearing up. They reached the manor. What a beauty, Nicole said, staring at the iron gates. The gate is probably locked. We'll have to wait here until someone. Creak! The heavy doors swung open on their own, leaving the path completely wide open. Nicole laughed. God really is watching over us. Let's go. She thought it was a miracle, but the thing watching them wasn't an angel. Nicole rushed inside, dragging her suitcase behind her, completely unaware of the snake in the grass. One wrong step, and things would have ended right there. But she didn't even look back. Inside the grounds, the nightmare was already unfolding. Jasha, come back here, Helen shouted. She stood at the door, clutching her rod, but Jasha was already gone into the dark. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, stumbling through the lilies, just to get away from that house. He was exhausted, and didn't know where he was going, until he saw a light up ahead. There she was. Molly was already standing at the top of the stairs, right in front of a glowing golden door. Jasha froze. He'd never seen anything like this before, and he wasn't the only one watching her. Jasha stood there, in the shadows, his legs still marked from the punishment he'd just escaped. He was looking for a way out, but instead, he found her. Molly turned around, slowly, facing the boy, who had just stumbled into her path. She didn't look surprised at all. In fact, She almost looked like she was waiting. The golden light from the door shone behind her as she gave him a small smile. Jasha didn't know who she was or why she was here, but his life was about to change. The two of them were finally together, but the real mystery was only just beginning. They finally made it to the golden gates, but before they could even step inside, the staff caught them. The maid wasn't happy. "Who are you kids, and how did you get past the gates?" Helen tried to explain. They were there to see Ms. Daria, but without an appointment, they were in big trouble. Then Molly noticed something about Jasha. That changed everything. "Wait, I thought boys weren't allowed here?" Helen snapped back. "That they aren't." But Jasha just stood there, claiming he was the only exception. Jasha had big dreams of becoming a witch, but the maid had a different mission. She was desperate to get Molly enrolled. She claimed Molly wasn't like the others. She had a gift that was rare, even for their kind. The rumors started spreading fast inside the academy. Molly couldn't help but brag about it. "She's a psychic. That's the big secret," everyone's whispering during music class. But Ms. Daria wasn't having it. "Focus on the lesson. Use your magic to play the notes without using your hands. It's harder than it looks, like babies learning to walk for the first time." But the real question was still hanging in the air. What exactly is a psychic witch? Penelope explained the truth about psychic witches. They don't just talk to the dead, they actually cross the line into their world. It's a dangerous kind of soul magic. You either become unstoppable or you completely lose your mind. Molly wasn't worried about the danger. She was worried about the competition. She wasn't about to let anyone take her top spot. But then, everyone went quiet. Jasha started playing the violin, the old-fashioned way, without any magic. He didn't need special powers to stand out. Even Penelope had to admit it. The kid was actually good. Jasha's music was like a spell, drifting through the entire academy. Everyone stopped just to listen. Even the staff in the hallways couldn't help but feel the weight of every single note. Ms. Daria was completely mesmerized. Such talent, she whispered, hardly believing what she was hearing. But then, she saw the class. The other girls were just standing there, lost in a daze. Instead of practicing, "Hey, focus," she snapped at them, trying to bring some order back to the room. But right then, the melody died. The beautiful song turned into a violent screech. It wasn't music anymore. It was a high-pitched shriek that felt like it was tearing through the air. Something was seriously wrong with Jasha, and the nightmare was just starting. The violin strings finally snapped. The pressure was just too much for the instrument to handle. But the energy didn't stop there. It slammed into the glass walls like a physical blow. Cracks started spreading everywhere. The whole room was about to give way. "Run!" Ms. Daria screamed, trying to get the girls out before it was too late. Then everything just exploded. A massive wall of freezing water came crashing in. It was total chaos. Jasha was swept off his feet as the classroom turned into a drowning pool. In the middle of all that water, Jasha wasn't alone. A girl in red appeared out of nowhere, looking totally fine. She was drifting through the flood like she belonged there, surrounded by fish and a massive manta ray. "Jasha, was it?" she asked, smiling like they were just hanging out at a park. "My name's Leora. It's nice to meet you." She didn't seem bothered by the chaos at all. She reached out and grabbed his hand with a huge grin. "Let's be friends, Jasha." It was the weirdest way to meet someone, but Jasha didn't have much of a choice. The real question was, who exactly is this girl? A new warning sign and a floor full of glass. Mariette was left to clean up the mess. Inside the classroom, the semester was finally coming to a close. Daria stood before them with a chilling announcement. The final subject was blood magic. Everyone knew their school only practiced soul magic, but what did that really mean? Every living being has its own unique soul, and the lesson was just beginning. Daria explained the truth. Witches are born with a gift, a direct link to their own soul. But blood magic is different. It doesn't use a soul, it harvests energy from blood. The school calls it vampirism, a parasitic way to gain power by stealing from others. Jasha listened in silence as the teacher warned them. This path was pure blasphemy. Outside the window, Leora watched the lesson, and she didn't look happy. Daria's voice was cold. "This magic destroys everyone, the predator and the prey." But for some people, the warning came just a little too late. Daria's lecture continued about the monsters and their victims. In a dark memory, Leora was on the floor, struggling to stay alive. She had one goal left. She had to protect her mistress at any cost. But the scene shifted to a bright hallway outside the classroom door. A woman told her not to be nervous and promised she'd be okay. The door creaked open, interrupting the lesson. As everyone turned to look, the woman announced they had a new student joining the class today. Leora stepped forward and said hello to her new classmates. Molly and Penelope watched as the girl from the window finally walked inside. She looked perfectly fine, but after what happened, nobody knew her real story. While everyone else played, Jasha was stuck outside, raking leaves in the garden. He was doing community service for breaking the school aquarium, and Gwen was loving every second. She watched him struggle, whistling a happy tune, while he did all the heavy lifting. Nearby at the swings, Molly was losing her patience with the new girl Leora. She didn't believe the rumors, and demanded that Leora prove she was actually psychic. Leora gave a fair warning, telling them her power could be pretty terrifying, but Molly wasn't backing down. She claimed that very little in this world actually scared her. Leora closed her eyes and took a deep breath. As the wind began to pick up, something was happening. Her hands started to twitch, and the atmosphere turned cold. Gwen reached for an apple, ready to cause more trouble, but the real show was just starting. Gwen suddenly froze. Her whole body stopped, like someone else was in control. She walked over to Jasha and gave him a polite apology for being so disrespectful. But a second later, the spell finally broke, and Gwen started screaming. She was absolutely furious, warning Leora never to try and possess her again. Gwen felt sick to her stomach, claiming it felt like something was slithering inside her chest. Penelope tried to calm her down, but the damage was done. Everyone was officially creeped out. The girls decided right then that Leora was way too dangerous to be around anymore. Even Molly agreed that what Leora did was totally out of line. They all walked away, leaving the new girl completely on her own. Leora sat on the swing, watching them go, in total silence. She finally showed them what she could do, but now she was all alone. Back at the swings, Jasha reached out to Leora, offering her an apple. It was a small gesture, but the school grounds were far from peaceful. Nearby in the garden, Helen and Daria were busy, hauling heavy sacks. The bags were moving, filled with strange pests that were taking over the wing. Daria was on edge, complaining about how the creatures hurt the fish. Suddenly one fell out, and Daria completely lost it, stomping the life out of it. She was terrified of them, calling them vampires. As she started to break down, Helen saw her struggling, and told her to go and finish the mopping instead. Daria was so relieved. She thanked Helen, and hurried away from the cart. Once she was alone, Helen used her powers to lift the heavy sacks. She floated them over, and dumped the creatures deep into a dark well. As they slithered down, Helen just sighed to herself in the dark. She couldn't believe the things she had to do just to keep Daria happy. Helen struck a match and watched the tiny flame flicker in the wind. She dropped it down into the deep darkness of the garden well. As the light fell, it revealed something hidden beneath the sacks. It wasn't just pests. Lying at the bottom of that cold pit, there was a person, tossed aside like trash. Among the slithering creatures, it was Jasha. He was badly hurt and completely motionless. He'd been thrown down there with the very things they were trying to destroy. Helen looked down, but she didn't move to help him at all. The match went out, leaving Jasha trapped in the absolute dark. Molly couldn't believe her eyes. The garden was full of impossible things, like the rosenmere flower, a hybrid of a rose and a lotus. Mariette explained, "It's a symbol of our faith, and proof of the Guardian's power over this entire world." Everything here felt upside down, land turning into sea, and sea turning into land, all in perfect harmony. But Helen had more to show her, pointing toward the house pool, where the water itself had been blessed long ago. Molly looked up at the massive tower. If there's no coastline here, then why is there a lighthouse? Helen just laughed, because even without a coast, there are still oceans. Molly was actually doing it. She was making a real friend, and she didn't want to mess it up. As they walked past the dolphins, she asked how any of this worked, but Helen just shrugged. "Some things aren't for us to know. We're just messengers for the gods." Molly finally understood why her maid sent her here. This place was special, and she was part of it now. Suddenly the bells rang out. The graduates were finally here. Mary and Penelope led the way, carrying flowers and chasing the light. "They're going to change the world," Helen said with a smile. "And one day soon, that's going to be us." Everything seemed so peaceful, as Molly and her friends watched the fish swim by, behind the thick glass. But then one fish stopped. It just stayed there, staring right at them, like it was seeing something else. Out of nowhere, it started slamming into the glass, over and over again, with terrifying force. Molly screamed, "What's happening? Why is it doing that?" As the water turned red, Helen didn't wait around. "Get a teacher, now!" something was very wrong. With the house pool, Helen brought the evidence right to Daria's desk. A fish from the pool, still spasming and covered in blood. She tried to warn her that these things were changing, becoming more aware and more sentient by the day. But Daria didn't want to hear it. She just wanted that thing off her expensive desk and out of her sight. Helen wouldn't back down. She even brought up Daria's sister just to get a reaction, and it definitely worked. Daria snapped back, insisting everything was under control. But Helen had one last question. Do you want to ask the pool yourself? Daria wasn't worried at all. She told Helen to relax, because the Guardians had already sent a companion. This new girl Leora was the answer they needed to guide Jasha straight toward his destiny. Down in the hallways, the school was still in chaos after the incident at the pool, and Molly was taking it hard. She told Jasha her maid left, without even saying goodbye. It felt like she'd been abandoned all over again. But Jasha just smiled and told her she wasn't alone. Most of the kids here didn't have parents either. He told her to stay strong and prove to everyone that she could become the greatest witch of all. Leora remembered what she was told, to find the brightest light in the entire world, and she knew she'd finally found it. She looked right at Jasha and made a bold promise that together they were going to change everything. Jasha just smiled back, officially welcoming her to the Rosenmere school. As they sat by the dark water, "Just call me Leo," she told him, and he repeated the name like it was a secret they shared. But as the lighthouse beam cut through the night, something was left behind, floating silently in the stream. Jasha drifted in the dark until he finally opened his eyes, but the reflection in the water wasn't the sky at all. An upside-down lighthouse towered deep beneath the surface, and someone was watching him from behind the glass. Jasha whispered, "Who?" The silence was shattered by the sound of something slamming against the glass, and the water turned red. Jasha looked back at the towering lighthouse, but the ocean floor was already waking up. Dark tentacles rose from the freezing depths, wrapping around him like a death grip. He desperately chanted, "A morning star will fall, the light protects me, the love of my sisters embraces me." But the prayer didn't stop. The shadow in the abyss, as two glowing red eyes stared back from the dark. The prayer was still on Jasha's lips when he finally woke up, back in the safety of his bed. But the terror from the water didn't stay in the dream. It followed him into the waking world. Daria looked down at him with those cold yellow eyes. "There's no evil in you. It was just a nightmare." She told him to go back to sleep and turned to walk away, like nothing had happened. But Jasha wasn't finished. He reached out and grabbed her ankle, stopping her in her tracks. He wasn't ready to be alone. Jasha couldn't let it go. He begged Daria for just one more prayer to keep the darkness away. But she didn't say a word. She just stood there, watching him sink further into his own fear. Later that morning, the halls were empty, and the wind outside was the only sound left. Jasha sat all alone until a familiar voice started singing a song he hadn't expected to hear. Leo walked in with a smile and a plate. "Happy 22nd birthday," he said softly. Jasha finally looked up. "Thank you," he replied, trying to find his voice again. Leo sat down and pushed a bowl of food toward his friend. "I was knocking for a while," he said quietly. Jasha didn't look up. "It's the nightmares again," he admitted, "and maybe some anxiety about getting older." He felt like his birthday was just a reminder of everything he still hadn't managed to do. Leo wasn't having it. "Don't think about that today," he insisted. "Let's just do something fun to get your mind off things." Jasha finally agreed. "Maybe playing the violin will help me forget the things I saw in the dark." They finished their meal and headed outside, where the autumn wind was pulling the leaves from the trees. Jasha reached into the case and pulled out his instrument, hoping the music could drown out the shadows still lingering in his head. Jasha headed toward the tower, carrying his violin case. Through the falling leaves, he just wanted a quiet place to play his music. But as they got closer, Leo spotted someone standing in the shadows of the great stone archway. "Here comes the star of the show," Leo said with a smirk. But Jasha wasn't laughing. Molly was waiting for them, with her arms crossed and a look on her face that meant trouble. She didn't move an inch. As they approached, she just stared them down and spoke one word, "Jasha." Her voice was cold, and suddenly, the birthday celebration felt like it was over. Molly didn't hold back, calling Jasha the star of the show, with a voice full of ice. Her friend laughed it off, asking if she wanted to stay and hear Jasha play music. But Molly wasn't having it. She claimed she was too busy, and stormed off without a word. Then, she suddenly stopped and turned back one last time. "Happy birthday, Jasha." Before anyone could react, she was already running away, leaving Jasha completely speechless. Gwen watched from the shadows, her eyes fixed on the balcony, where Jasha and Molly stood together. She couldn't stand the sight, muttering that the peace was ruined, before making her move. Suddenly, A loud bang echoed through the air, startling everyone nearby. Molly didn't understand, asking what just happened. As Jasha looked down at the case, the lid was forced open, revealing the violin inside, smashed into pieces. Without saying a word, Jasha threw the broken wood over the railing and into the wind. It was all over. The birthday gift was nothing but trash now. Leo handed the violin back, telling Daria there was nothing he couldn't fix. As he started to play, the music drifted through the entire school. But something was wrong. The notes didn't bring peace, they brought nothing but pain. The other students couldn't stand it, covering their ears and begging for him to stop. Gwen finally reached her limit, shouting that she couldn't take another second of it. She stormed onto the balcony and grabbed the violin right out of Leo's hands. "Do you have no shame?" she asked, staring him right in the eyes. Leo didn't understand, asking what she meant, but Gwen wasn't playing games. She got right in his face, shouting that his music made everyone miserable. Then, she lost her temper and shoved him back hard. Leo fell straight into the roses, crying out in pain. As the thorns caught his skin, Molly didn't hesitate, stepping right between them to shield him from Gwen. Gwen just laughed it off, telling Molly she should keep a closer eye on her boyfriend. Molly tried to deny it, but Gwen was already done with the whole conversation. She turned and walked away, carrying the violin with her, and promising to end this for good. Gwen wasn't finished yet, telling Jasha to change his clothes and cover himself up. She told him to prove that he had at least a little bit of shame. As she walked away, Jasha picked up his violin, wondering what her problem was. He just wanted to play, but now he worried that he was making everyone miserable. Molly stepped closer, telling him that his music didn't bother her at all. She reached out, gently touching the cut on his shoulder, where the thorns had scratched him. Unlike Gwen, Molly said she wasn't afraid of how she felt. Jasha sighed, feeling like Gwen was just looking for excuses to kick him out. But Molly looked him in the eyes, promising that no matter what, she would always have his back. Penelope finally opened her eyes, but she wasn't exactly awake, at least not in the usual way. Her body was glowing as she drifted out of bed and into the dark hallway. Something was pulling her deeper into the house, and there was no stopping now. Jasha sat there in the dark, staring at the flickering candle and thinking about the promise that still hadn't come true. He was supposed to be a witch, but right now, he just felt like a fool, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, a crack split the silence and his glass at the same time. He didn't even have to look to know who was standing there, watching over him again. "Leo, I told you, you don't have to follow me everywhere I go." But deep down, he was glad he wasn't actually alone. The quiet night didn't last long. Daria showed up with an urgent message. "Jasha, you've been summoned to the teacher's lounge right now." Jasha knew this was serious. He stood up immediately, but he had one condition for his silent protector. "Do not follow me. This is private. I'll tell you everything, if it's worth sharing." While Jasha headed out, Molly was miles away, staring at an old photo and wishing things were different. She let out a heavy sigh as the door to the lounge finally clicked shut behind Jasha. Jasha walked into the room, expecting a normal meeting, but the atmosphere was already cold. The teachers didn't waste time. They'd made a decision, and it was a total nightmare for someone like him. "You're banned from music," they told him flat out, "because the other students filed a petition against you." Jasha couldn't believe it. He'd worked so hard, but they didn't care about his talent or his effort. They called it inappropriate, claiming he was giving the girls indecent thoughts just by being on stage. "It's simple biology," they said like it was a fact. "You're a boy, and there are things you shouldn't do." He tried to speak up, to explain his side, but they shut him down before he could even start. "Don't make this complicated," they warned him, as the rain began to pour outside the window. Just like that, his world was falling apart, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. The rain kept falling, matching the mood inside that tiny room where Jasha was hiding. He felt completely lost. They'd taken away the only thing he actually cared about. "Why even stay here if I can't play music?" he wondered, staring into nothing. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the room, and the mirror shattered. Jasha knew that sound. It wasn't an accident. "Leo, are you there?" He looked out the window, past the rain, at the old tower, standing tall in the dark. Something was calling him, and for the first time since the meeting, he had a reason to move. The glass shattered with a sudden crack, and Jasha didn't wait to see what caused it. He ran for his life, slamming the door shut and leaning against it just to catch his breath. But the silence didn't last a second. Something was moving on the other side. A bloody hand reached through the gap, and a shadow loomed over the doorway. Then came the voice, distorted and hollow, whispering a name he definitely recognized. "El Leora." The creature groaned and Jasha realized the nightmare was just beginning. Jasha couldn't believe what was standing right in front of him. The creature groaned, "Eli Ora," and the voice sent chills down his spine. He scrambled back, trying to get away, but there was nowhere to run. Then the doorknob started to turn, all on its own. Something was coming out, and Jasha wasn't ready to face it. Jasha ran for his life, scrambling up the stairs as fast as he could. But just as he reached the very top, a shadow loomed over him. He lost his footing and started to slip right into the darkness. Suddenly, Molly appeared out of nowhere, reaching out her hand. "I got you," she shouted, but was she there to help, or was this another trap? Jasha took a nasty fall, tumbling all the way down, until everything went dark. "Ow, ow, my head," he groaned, trying to make sense of where he was. A drop of blood hit the floor, and that's when Molly found him. "Jasha, wake up," she pleaded, desperately trying to get him moving, but a sickening crack echoed through the hall, and the nightmare was standing right behind them. The creature had returned, and this time, there was no escape. The creature was falling apart, barely able to speak. "Can't reach, Leora," it groaned through the blood. It seemed obsessed with protecting her, even as its own body started to fail. Suddenly, the sink turned on, all by itself, filling the hall with noise. Then came the stomps, heavy and loud, echoing off the walls. What's that?" Jasha whispered. Something massive was walking through the water, and it wasn't alone. The maid looked back one last time. Run," she managed to gasp. A giant shadow stretched across the wall, and the real monster had finally arrived. The heavy stomps echoed closer and closer as giant eels slithered out of the dark. Jasha backed away, trying to convince himself this was all just a bad dream. "No," he cried out. "That can't be. You're just a nightmare." He started to pray, desperately calling out for the light to protect his soul. "The power of the light surrounds me," he whispered, clinging to the memory of his sister's love. But the stomping didn't stop, and the prayer wasn't working. The creature loomed over him, its many heads hissing in the dark, as a bloody hand reached for his face. He was trapped, and the light was nowhere to be found. "Love?" the voice whispered, in the middle of the darkness. "They don't love me," he realized, as the nightmare finally reached its peak. Suddenly, a sharp slap echoed through the room. "Jasha!" Molly shouted. He snapped back to the real world, finding her looking down at him. "Thank goodness," she said, letting out a long breath. "Stupid boy," she scolded him, "you nearly gave me a heart attack." She didn't waste any more time. "Let's get you to the hospital wing." But even though the monster was gone, those words still haunted him. Jasha was losing his mind, waiting for help, but the nurse didn't want to hear it. She told him to be patient and quit complaining, but he knew time was running out. Finally, the door opened, and Ms. Daria walked into the room. Jasha begged for protection, but she just sighed, thinking it was another bad dream. He looked her in the eye and told her the truth. This wasn't a nightmare. It was actually happening. Jasha wasn't backing down. He insisted it was real, that something had actually reached for his soul. Molly was terrified, but the adults didn't want to hear another word about it. Helen tried to play it off like nothing happened, while Ms. Daria told everyone to stay calm. She forced Jasha to lie back down and covered his eyes with her cold hands. Everything went dark, but the real nightmare was only just beginning. Jasha didn't stop there. He told them everything about the ghost and how she wanted Leora. Ms. Daria acted calm, telling him he was safe, but then she whispered one terrifying word. Out of nowhere, Helen lashed out and slapped him right across the face. She accused him of threatening the school, but Jasha was just trying to survive. He's trapped in a place where the truth is treated like a crime, and nobody's coming to help. Jasha was terrified, but nobody believed him. They just blamed it on his head injury. Helen didn't hold back. She said he was just an emotional wreck who didn't belong there. Even the others joined in, claiming he was just making up stories to get some attention. Ms. Daria ended the talk with a cold prayer, leaving Jasha alone with the real monster. He's surrounded by people, but he's never been more alone in his life, and the danger is still there. Helen wasn't finished. She promised to keep a close eye on Jasha before finally walking away. Ms. Daria leaned in, asking one last time if he'd seen anything else lurking in the dark. A horrific image flashed through his mind, a monster made of nightmares, staring right back at him. But Jasha just lied. He told her no, and waited for them to finally leave him alone. The second the door closed, he couldn't hold it in, but he didn't realize Molly was still watching. Just when Jasha thought He was all alone. Molly stepped forward. With a surprising confession, she looked him in the eye and told him the truth. She hadn't signed that petition against him. It was a small gesture, but in a place like this, it changed everything between the two of them. Now Jasha has to wonder, is she really an ally, or is this just another part of the game?